It's interesting that the parents have lost their power. Parents nowadays really have no authority at all over their children because they willfully gave up their rights to their children. When you take sides with the government and with politics, you willfully give up your rights to them. And now Americans or parents are in some sort of trance. It's like this child that you give birth to, that you help to bring into this world. Now this child grows up, runs your life, runs your house, and you passively sit by, watch it happen, and have no power to do anything about it. Parents are afraid to be parents. And it ought not to be that way. Now, we have these big corporations, just like what happened back in the slave trade, where these big businesses had their hands in the slave trade. They made money from the slave trade. And now we have a different type of slave trade. And now everything is rainbow. Everything that's being promoted is the LGBTQ community, although they are the minority. I saw a commercial that Adidas was promoting where they had a dude impersonating a woman, was modeling women garments. He was wearing women bikinis. Women are being replaced, especially in the so-called black community. And the sad thing about that is not only they sitting by silently allowing it to happen, but you have so many women and even black women that's protecting that rainbow class. I watched a video with Dawson. He called himself Dawson Speaks on YouTube. And he was talking about Gabrielle Union and Dwyane Wade and their son. And he was basically saying that people need to leave them alone and allow them to raise their child the way they choose to. Now, this is someone that, of course, is always attacking preachers. He's always doing videos on things that preachers do, exposing them. So somewhere in the back of my mind, it tells me that he could be secretly a part of the LGBTQ community. But I want to read a scripture to you that I find to be quite interesting, especially when it comes to parents not knowing their rights or parents not exerting their rights to raise their children the right way. Now, I completely understand. You have parents that want their children to come up in the way they feel inside, but children have to be guided. And there's so many children that's growing up, even in Christian homes, that's unguided. They're being guided by the government. And again, there's parents that's afraid to raise their kids upright. So when you see your son or your daughter acting like the opposite sex, it's your duty to try to prevent that from happening and guide them in the right direction. But when they become an adult, that's when they make choices for themselves. But as for me and my house, I will serve the Lord. And that's the attitude that many Christians or so-called Christians don't have in this generation. They don't have that spirit as for me and my house. Your concern is what the government will say or how you will be labeled or classified. See, I find it interesting too that you have the so-called Black Americans that in most cases don't know who they are because of the slave trade. So they were always labeled and titled as Negro or Black or Colored or different bywords, and now it's African American or Black American, which they are neither of those things. But if someone in their family, say their mother or their father or even grandparents, have Native American ancestry and they begin to identify with being Native American, you have other so-called blacks that would rail against them and tell them you are not that. In other words, you have no right to self-identify as being Native American. You have no other option but to be African, because that's where the darker race came from, not realizing that we're all over the world. We're all over this planet, not just one continent. So Black Americans have no right to self-identify, but yet a man can identify as a woman or a woman identify as a man, and it's okay. That is protected. So now you as a parent is referring to your son as a she and your daughter as a he because that's what they identify as. Because you don't want to be labeled as being a hate crime or some type of phobia. So you go along with the agenda of this satanic kingdom. But yet let a so-called Black American say, I'm not black, I'm Native, or I'm not black, I'm this or that. You have an issue with that. Black Americans cannot identify, cannot self-identify without being attacked. Not just by the so-called black race, but also by others because they want to keep you in captivity. Captivity of the mind, of the spirit, of the soul. Because once they're able to control your thinking, they control the rest of your body. I want to read a scripture taken from the book of Joshua, the 24th chapter, reading the 14th to the 16th verse. And it reads as follows. Now therefore fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in truth. In these days and time, even in the church, the Lord is not feared and he's not served in sincerity and in truth. They claim to serve the Lord in truth, but there's always a but afterwards. Now therefore fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the flood and in Egypt, and serve ye the Lord. Now I find that to be quite interesting because if you look before the floods, there's several events that took place, and I want to read a couple of those events. Now I'm not going to go back to the flood, but I want to read something that came after the flood. This is after the Lord looked down and saw what was going on and decided to destroy the first world because they were eating and drinking and marrying and being given in marriage. And this is after the sons of God saw the daughters of men. These divine beings cohabited with the women of the earth and produced offspring. Now, I want to put a bookmark in what I was just reading. And I want to read Genesis, the 19th chapter, reading the 1st to the 28th verse. And this is what took place at that time. Now, there are preachers out there, pastors, that use the event of Sodom and Gomorrah to justify LGBTQ community. These are the pastors that read this and say, well, these cities weren't destroyed because of homosexuality or sodomy. There were other things, and then they start quoting different things of the law that were considered an abomination. But I'm going to read the entire story to you. And pay close attention to what's being said. And the reasoning behind Sodom and Gomorrah and the regions around it was destroyed. Now, the Most High is all wise and knowing. And I'm going to get to that part. I'm not going to get ahead of myself. I'm going to read and then I'll speak on this in a few minutes. The 19th verse says, or the 19th chapter says, And there came two angels to Sodom at even. And Lot sat in the gate of Sodom. And Lot, seeing them, rose up to meet them. And he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. Now Lot sitting outside the city. He's not in the city. I'm sure Lot was one of those people that they would call a goody two-shoe or say, you think you're better than we are. Lot lived a sanctified life because he lived separate from them. He separated himself from the world or from those cities because he knew the spirit of that city and he knew what was going on. The second verse says, And he said, Behold, now, my lords, turn in, I pray you, into your servant's house, and tarry all night, and wash your feet, and ye shall rise up early, and go on your ways. And they said, Nay, but we will abide in the street all night. See, these two men, which were angelic beings, were there with a mission. They weren't there to announce their mission. They were there to do what God sent them to do. See, they didn't want nothing to hinder them or get in their way. So when Lot invited them in, they said, nah, we'd rather stay out in the street all night because we come with a mission. And it says, And he pressed upon them greatly, and they turned in unto him, and entered into his house, and he made them a feast, and did bake unleavened bread, and they did eat. But before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round, both old and young, all the people from every quarter. Now, try to vision this in your mind. And see, this is why it's important for you to understand that when you look at children that come up in that life to the point where they want surgery done and the government supports that. Now, you have women that medically need, say, an x-ray, but their insurance company would turn them down because they would deem that as being not medically necessary. Although they have an ailment going on in their body, they're paying for insurance. But the insurance company will say that it's not medically necessary, but yet at the same time, you have a child, an underage child, that feel that he's a woman, or she's a man, or a boy. And so these insurance companies will allow that child to undergo surgery, to transform that child into the opposite sex. And your tax dollars pay for it. But this woman that medically need this either x-ray or medical thing, she's denied because it's not medically necessary. So these young kids that's undergoing these surgeries are not innocent at all. See, and God doesn't look at the fact that they're children, so now I have to be compassionate with them because they don't know no better. But see, what spirit is controlling that child or operating within that child? I'm not going to get into that. Maybe I'll speak on that later. But look at the reaction of the men of Sodom. It says, but before they lay down, the men of that city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round. In other words, they surrounded the house, both old and young, all the people from every quarter. And they called unto Lot and said unto him, where are the men which came in to thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them, or that we may have sex with them. They wanted to rape these two angels. And Lot went out at the door unto them, and shut the door behind, and said, I pray you, brethren, do not so wickedly. Behold now, I have two daughters. Now, I have an issue with this because his daughters are supposed to be his prized possession, but I guess in this instance, because of the fact that he know that these are angels or men of God, he'd rather sacrifice his daughters than these men. But in this modern time, I have an issue with that because if anything, he should have protected his daughters. His daughters should have been protected, as well as these men that came in unto him. But even then, I don't think even Lot understood that these were angels. He just knew by spiritual discernment that these were men of the Most High, that these were righteous men. He says, behold now, I have two daughters, which have not known man. In other words, these women are virgins. Let me, I pray you, bring them out unto you, and do ye to them as is good in your eyes. In other words, do what you want to them. Only unto these men do nothing. For therefore came they under the shadow of my roof. In other words, that's why I brought them in here in the first place, to protect them. The 9th verse says, and they said, this is what the men of the city said, stand back. And they said again, this one fellow, now they're speaking of Lot, this one fellow came in to sojourn, and he will needs be a judge. In other words, this man came in here to live among us, and now he wants to be a judge. He wants to dictate to us what we should and should not do. And then it says, now will we deal worse with thee than with them. In other words, we're going to deal worse with you now than with these two men. And they pressed sore upon the man, even Lot, and came near to break the door. They became violent because Lot refused to send these men out to them. The 10th verse says, but the men, in other words, the angels, put forth their hand and pulled Lot into the house to them and shut to the door. And they smote the men that were at the door of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves to find the door. And the men said to Lot, hast thou here any besides? In other words, is anyone else here besides you? Son-in-law, and thy sons, and thy daughters, and whatsoever thou hast in the city, bring them out of this place. In other words, man, you got to leave here tonight. This isn't a place for you to be. For we will destroy this place, because the cry of them is waxing great before the face of the Lord. And the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So the prayers of the saints that were crying out, that was praying endlessly day and night about what was going on in these cities, the Lord heard their prayers. And he sent these two battle angels to destroy it. So you have to be careful how you entertain strangers. The Bible says for some have entertained angels unaware. So you have no idea who's who. So God sent these two men to destroy this place. Not so much as because of sodomy, but because of the evil and the violence that was going on in this place. And this was the end of it. This is where the angel said, listen, man, you and your children, your sons-in-laws, I'm giving you a warning. Get out of this place because we're here to destroy it. I'm going to read that again. For we will destroy this place because the cry of them is waxing great before the face of the Lord. And the Lord has sent us to destroy it. That was the sole purpose of those two men, those two angels coming to that city to destroy it. The 14th verse says, and Lot went out and spoke unto his sons-in-law, which married his daughters, and said, up, get you out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this city. But he seemed as one that mocked unto his sons-in-law. And we have people unto this very day, man, that when you try to warn them of the things of God, they will scoff and laugh at you. They'll mock you and think that you're just some type of fanatic. They don't believe you. But if you notice, Lot left them alone. When they laughed and scoffed and made fun of him, he left them alone. He didn't sit there and try to beg and plead with them and try to get them to believe. He left them alone. The 15th verse says, and when the morning arose, then the angels, now notice it changes from these two men to angels. Now it's identifying who these two men were. And when the morning arose, then the angels hastened Lot, saying, arise, take thy wife and thy two daughters, which are here, lest thou be consumed in the iniquity of the city. And while he lingered, the men lay hold upon his hand, and upon the hand of his wife, and upon the hand of his 2 daughters. The Lord being merciful unto him, and they brought them forth and set them without the city. Now keep in mind, notice, he didn't grab the son-in-laws and bring them. They left them behind. The 17th verse says, and it came to pass, when they had brought them forth abroad, that he said, escape for thy life. Look not behind thee, neither stay thou in all the plains. Escape to the mountain, lest thou be consumed. Now, these angels knew exactly what they were talking about because they wanted to destroy every inch of iniquity, even to the place where Lot wanted to go. See, this is what happens when you don't take God's advice. See, God is all-knower. But because of the fact that he found favor, he agreed, he allowed Lot to stay in the plains, which was originally supposed to have been destroyed. Which means that spirit still rest, ruled, and abide there. See, had he left, what his daughters did maybe would not have happened. Because he told them to escape to the mountains, lest thou be consumed. But watch Lot started to negotiate with these men of God. And Lot said unto them, oh, not so, my Lord. Behold now, thy servant has found grace in thy sight, and thou hast magnified thy mercy, which thou hast showed unto me in saving my life. And I cannot escape to the mountain, lest some evil take me and I die. And if you read further, you'd find out what happened after they escaped to wherever he wanted to go. Then it says in the 20th verse, behold now, this city is near to flee unto, and it is a little one. Oh, let me escape there. It is not a little one. He is asking the question, is it not a little one? And my soul shall live. The 21st verse says, and he said unto him, see, I have accepted thee concerning this thing also, that I will not overthrow this city, for the which thou hast spoken. In other words, I won't destroy that city. This is a city that was supposed to have been originally destroyed. The 22nd verse says, haste now, escape there, for I cannot do anything till thou become there. In other words, I can't do nothing. I can't destroy this city unless you and your family is gone, man, because God showed favor upon them. And see, that's how good God is, man. When God is on your side, man, he will make sure that no harm will come upon you or your family, although you may see disaster going on all around you. And then it says, therefore, the name of the city was called Zoar. The 23rd verse says, the sun was risen upon the earth when Lot entered into Zoar. Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah, brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities, and all the plain, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and that which grew upon the ground. But his wife looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. Now, I find that to be quite interesting because What was in that city that made her turn around and look? Because in the beginning, nothing was really said about his wife or what she did in the city. Did she partake in what was going on? And because that was Lot's wife, she was saved. But because she disobeyed that one command not to turn back, that was how she lost her life. Something very simple. Don't look back. But his wife looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. That's how destructive and how great the destruction of those cities were. That when she turned around and looked back, the destruction of that city is what made her become a pillar of salt. The 27th verse says, and Abraham got up early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord. And he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the plain, and beheld, and lo, the smoke of the country went up as the smoke of a furnace. This is what happened after the flood. Now I'm going to continue reading Joshua, where it talked about serving the gods on the other side of the flood. It says in the 15th verse again, and if it seem evil unto you to serve the Lord. Or better yet, let me back up to the 14th verse. Now therefore fear the Lord, and serve him in sincerity and in truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the flood and in Egypt, and serve ye the Lord. The 15th verse says, and if it seem evil unto you to serve the Lord, choose you this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the flood, or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land ye dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And the people answered and said, God forbid that we should forsake the Lord and serve other gods. So that's the mindset or attitude that godly parents of this time should take. You should not allow the government or anything for that matter to control how you raise your kids. It's your responsibility, your obligation to raise your children right, regardless of what they choose or they think they want. See, you have these young people that will grow up talking about, I'm 16, I'm 17, this is me, this is who I am. That is not who you are, and that is not who I'm going to raise you to be. So you have a choice to make. Choose ye this day whom you will serve. And that's why you have parents that disown their children when they decide to go the opposite direction. See, and you have people that's going to judge them and say it's wrong. That's your child. That's your seed. Why would you turn your back on your own child? You should be there to support them. But that's when a parent has to stand up, especially if their dad is in the home. So in the case of Dwyane Wade, him as a dad, because I don't think that's Gabriel Union's son. So Dwyane Wade was supposed to stand up and says, nah, this is my son. This is supposed to be a gift from God if he didn't sell his soul. Because sometimes you have people that would get involved with demons. See, they look and they see a woman or a man. And they think because they have flesh that they were sent from God. But in reality, these are demons that's occupying those bodies. And maybe I'll speak on that later. So they get together in a union, and then you have this woman that's supposed to love you, that's supposed to honor you, respect you, obey you, and love your children. The same woman is in agreement with your son being surgically transformed into a little girl. That's not love. Love will speak out against that and say, no, I don't agree with that and I don't approve of it. And if you allow your son to go that route, then we can't be together because that's against the nature of God. That's when you know that someone really loves you and really cares, is when they're willing to go against the grain. So I'm going to read that again. And if it seem evil unto you to serve the Lord. There's people nowadays that think serving the Lord is evil. Because God has rules. And God will be swift to destroy you if you break his rules. See, that's what a lot of people don't like to talk about. They like to talk about God's love and his grace and his mercy and his kindness and his gentleness. But know ye not that no uncleanness will enter the kingdom of God. The Bible says, choose ye this day whom you will serve. You can't serve two gods. You either love one or you hate the other. You can't hold on to this over here and talk about how you love God. You can't do that. See? And that's what's happening in most of these churches today. They've gotten away from teaching God's truth. They've gotten away from that. But the 15th verse says, if it seem evil unto you to serve the Lord, choose ye this day whom ye will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the flood. In other words, I'm giving you an option. I'm not saying that you can't serve those gods. You do what you want to do. But it says, or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land ye dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And see, that's when a man stands up and say, we. And he's not speaking only for himself. He's speaking in behalf of his family. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. If you're going to live in this house, we are going to serve the Lord. That has no place in this house. And the 16th verse says, and the people answered and said, God forbid that we should forsake the Lord and serve other gods. Did you not know that by you accepting the Transformers and their way of life, that you are now serving another God? Yes, you may have family members, offspring, friends, relatives that's gone about in that life. And yes, I have family members, cousins. And I love my cousins. But I don't love them more than I love God. It's wrong. And my cousins know exactly where I stand. They know exactly where I stand. And not only that, my cousins have no issue. My cousins have no issue with me knowing or believing what I believe. They have no issue with it at all. See, my cousins know where I stand, and they give me respect for that. They go their way, I go my way. When I see them, how you doing? I respect them. They respect me. I don't bash them, and they have nothing to say about me. Now, you have to excuse me because a minute ago I looked at this mic that I thought I was using, and the mic wasn't on. And I'm like, what the? Because I'm thinking I did this whole video with no mic. But fortunately, I have the mic on my MacBook here that's still on. Okay? But I'm going to continue. So it's meant for this message to go out. Right? So that leads me to this last scripture. Taken from the book of Luke, the 17th chapter, reading the 26th to the 37th verse. And I'm going to give you a glimpse to the days of Noah, right? And look at what was going on in this time period, because what was happening in the days of Noah and even after the flood is happening this very day. Okay? So the devil never changes his tactics. They never change the tactics. It's always the same results. And God's spirit is always the same. His discernment is always the same. And that's why those that have the spirit of discernment can see that. We can discern that. Now, reading the 26th to the 37th verse, it reads as follows. And as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it also in the days of the Son of Man. In other words, the same thing happened in the days of Noah is the way it's going to be even to this day. They did eat. They drank. They married wives. They were given in marriage until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all. Likewise also, as it was in the days of Lot. Now, it's given examples in time past when the Most High destroyed man for their wickedness. It starts out by the days of Noah, and now it's talking about the days of Lot, what happened after the flood. Likewise also, as it was in the days of Lot. They did eat. They did drink. They bought, they sold, they planted, they built. But the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. The 30th verse says, even thus shall it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed. In other words, what happened yesterday is surely going to happen in this time period. In that day, he which shall be upon the housetop, and his stuff in the house, let him not come down and take it away. And he that is in the field, let him likewise not return back. Excuse me. Boy, I guess I'm talking too much because my throat kind of got dry there and scratchy. And I'm going to read that again in the 31st verse. In that day, he which shall be upon the housetop and his stuff in the house, let him not come down to take it away. And he that is in the field, let him likewise not return back. And then it says, remember Lot's wife. Whoever shall seek to save his life shall lose it, and whosoever shall lose his life shall preserve it. The 34th verse says, I tell you, in that night there shall be two men. Now, I find this to be quite interesting. Listen to the wording of what this is saying. I tell you, in that night, in other words, when Christ returns, this is how much time has changed in these times and in the time to come. I tell you, in that night, there shall be two men in one bed. The one shall be taken, and the other shall be left. The 35th verse says, two women shall be grinding together. The one shall be taken, and the other left. The 36th verse says, two men shall be in the field. The one shall be taken, and the other left. And then the 37th and final verse says, and they answered and said unto him, where, Lord? And he said unto them, whosoever the body is, thither will the eagles be gathered together. Wheresoever the body is, there will the eagles be gathered together. This reminds me of in the days with Pharaoh and how the firstborns were killed. How they were taking the first of everything, of every living thing, the cattle, the firstborn, and how there was complete bloodshed. This is what that reminds me of. And I find it interesting that it didn't say a man and his wife, but it says that in that night there shall be two men in one bed. Why is there two men in that bed? And then it says the one shall be taken and the other shall be left. Just because that other one is left don't mean that that one is free from destruction. See, keep that in mind. So we are living in very dangerous times. And I'll repeat that. We are living in very dangerous times, and you better heed the warning. And those that are parents need to stand up and be parents and learn to stand up for your children. You don't abort them. See, that's just another form of Pharaoh killing off the Israelites. That wasn't designed for white people. Yes, there will be some that sacrifice, but that's to destroy the so-called black people, the people of the Most High Yah, the Israelites. And y'all are falling for it. The same thing that put your ancestors in captivity, you're falling for it today. I repeat that. The same thing you're falling, that your ancestors fell, and a lot of y'all are worshiping your ancestors. You call upon those same ancestors and taking on the spirit of those ancestors and taking on the demonic energy or information of your damned ancestors, and now you're going to end up in the same position that they were. This is how slavery repeats itself. This is how the so-called black race is being wiped out to this day. And you're supporting it. Instead of supporting and protecting your children, you want to abort them. And that's not God's way. So, parents need to stand up and be parents. Stop allowing others to dictate to you how you should raise your child. If you see a child going in the wrong direction, it's your responsibility. And I'm going to talk to these men right quick. And maybe I'll do another video on this. I'm going to talk to the men out there, especially in the so-called black community. It's easy for a lot of y'all to point your fingers at these women and say it's the women's fault, the reason why these kids are growing up like they are. But you were the one that helped lay down with this woman. You need to be more selective on the women you choose to be with. See, you're choosing these women that have a demonic nature. Or you have women that's choosing these men that have a demonic nature. And so when the child is produced, like in the days of old, when the sons of God saw the daughters of men, and they took upon themselves wives, and when they bore these children, these were children, androgynous demons. Half human, half divine. And now we're in a time where you find so much witchery going on, especially in the so-called black community. Everybody want to be a witch. Everybody want to be a warlock or a Satanist. That's not normal. Is that the spirit of your ancestors? Being a witch, being a warlock, being a Satanist? Black people are just too free doing evil. The only freedom that you have today is doing evil upon the land. See, a lot of y'all are still out there protesting to be free, but you're free to do evil. And notice, no one is coming against you for doing evil or breaking the laws and commandments of God. But you're just too free. So feedback, tell me what you think. I can continue going on and on, but I'm already in to 52 minutes. Feedback, tell me what you think. Until next time, I'm fearless.